From beautiful downtown Sacramento, it's time for Beach Blanket Fort Bingo.
Beach Blanket Fort Bingo. Beach Blanket, Beach Blanket Fort Bingo, Fort Bingo. Spazzy's got a show when you really want to know what's going on. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Beach Blanket, Beach Blanket Fort Bingo, Fort Bingo. Art and music, golden view, and your favorite comics too. Grab a spot and settle in, 'cause it's high time we begin. Beach Blanket Fort Bingo Podcast. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hi, everybody. My name is Steve Schnee, and welcome to Beach Blanket Fort Bingo. We have a very special guest with us, but before I introduce him, I'd like to first introduce my co-host. Even though he's just a wee little man on your screen, he's actually bigger than life in person. He's a bass-slinging rock and roll gypsy, and his name is Ronnie Barnett.
Steve, thank you.
On this episode of Beach Blanket Fort Bingo, we welcome none other than Sal Solo, the frontman for British band Classix Nouveaux, one of the 1980s most unique bands and one of the pioneers of the new romantic movement that also included Duran Duran, Spandau Ballet, Visage, and many others. To celebrate their 40th anniversary, Cherry Red has released a 4 CD box set, The Liberty Recordings, 1981 to 83. But even more exciting, and what we're really here to talk about, is that the original quartet of Sal, Mick Sweeney, Gary Steadman, and BP Herding have reunited and recorded a brand new version of Inside Outside, a classic track from their debut album. And they did it as a thank you to their longtime fans. But before we start talking about that, I would like you to put your hands together for a warm round of applause for Mr. Sal Solo. Welcome to the Blanket Fort, Sal.
Hey guys, nice to see you in California. I'm in Florida myself.
What brought you over here, Sal? What made you decide to move here?
Well, I guess at the time I sort of felt that everything I could do in England and Europe I'd already done. And so it seemed like a new challenge, you know? They say a change is as good as a rest. So it was like a whole brand new life for me. I could be a baby again. When I first came, I didn't know how to find the post offices and what they sold in different stores. I didn't even know what a Target was, you know, or a Walmart, really. And so it was great. New lease of life.
To celebrate the 40th anniversary of your debut album, Night People, and as a gift to the fans, you just released a newly recorded version of Inside Outside, which was one of the tracks on the album as well as a single. But what inspired the 4 original members to get back together and to do this?
Well, it's kind of a long story, so I hope you've got time.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I think we have to say that things are so very different today with music and with bands. And so round about 1985, I think we thought Classix Nouveaux was finished forever and didn't really think much more about it. And even when I moved to America over 21 years ago, and I was kind of clearing out my things in London, I'd been asked by Cherry Red or other companies before, do you have old footage of live concerts and things like that we could put out on DVD? I said, I threw it all away. I didn't think anybody would ever be interested in that stuff. Just recently, some of the fans online were asking about the clothes I used to wear on stage on the videos. Well, sorry, they were all thrown out, you know, when I cleared my closets in London. And so for almost 30 years, I didn't really think too much about Classix, and we were not really in touch. But then 2 or 3 different things happened. I think, first of all the new technologies that have come out since that time. The fact that we used to record in Abbey Road and other famous studios. And then at a certain point, I'm saying to myself, I can get better sounds on my MacBook than we used to get in the world's most famous studios.
Yeah.
So that was kind of tempting anyway. And the other 2 phenomena that have happened, the one is old bands re-emerging and being popular. It just didn't happen before. The first time we came to America in 1981, I remember our agent said, he was really excited. He said, "I've got tickets tonight to see the Stones. I want to see if they can still rock at 40." Because you just didn't have bands 40 years old playing
Yeah.
together at that
Mhm.
time. So now that you've got bands who are over 70, you know, we're sort of sprite young things compared to some of the bands who are out there, REO Speedwagon and all these kinds of people, you know.
Yeah.
So that was a kind of strange thing that's happened in our long rest. The other thing is the Facebook groups, and I really never thought about it when I joined Face Group. I was thinking I was going to have maybe 10 Facebook friends so I could communicate with family and close friends.
Mhm.
I wasn't expecting to be getting all these requests from all over the globe, from Estonia and Latvia and Brazil and whatever.
Mhm.
And a lot
Mhm.
of times I wouldn't even accept the friend request because I don't know these people. This isn't why I went on Facebook. And then at some point, I really don't know when it started to happen, but there were these Classix Nouveaux groups. And so we were a bit bemused. It's like, why would anybody be interested in Classix after so many years and decades? And as time has gone by, they've only become more committed, you know, more enthusiastic. Almost every day now, they're posting amazing things. They're
Mhm.
posting posters, flyers from places we played, tickets where they could pay £1 to see Classix Nouveaux one day, to see U2 another day,
Mhm.
and all
Mhm.
these huge people. It's really an interesting little study of rock and roll history, I guess. Anyway, getting back to the technology side. So maybe 10, 12 years ago, I must have had a period where I wasn't doing a whole lot. And I'm the kind of person, I'm not going to get depressed and stay in bed or watch TV all day. I've got to find something constructive to do. So at a particular moment, I thought, I wonder what Classix Nouveau would sound like if we'd had the technology that we have today. So
Mhm.
just to amuse myself, I started remaking a few of the songs, and that was it. I didn't plan to do anything with them. I didn't let anybody else hear them. They were just for my own private enjoyment.
Yeah.
And then in more recent times, then the Facebook groups, they started posting these anniversaries. So they were telling us when we had released a particular song or a
Yeah.
particular album or whatever. We would never have known that stuff. I really don't know how they get that information. And so at a certain point when they kept persisting, and like, so today is the anniversary of, you know, is it a
Mhm.
dream or something?
Yeah.
And so I reached out to the other guys, and as you referred to, it was the classic lineup. Really, we had a few changes towards the sort of death knells of the band,
Yeah.
but the classic lineup, it was the four of us. And so I just reached out to the other guys and I said, what do you think about maybe trying a song for one of these anniversaries to surprise the fans? And so I sent them a few of these remakes that I'd done, and they liked them. And they chose Inside Outside as the one they liked best. And so that's how it happened.
Inside Outside, I thought is a great song to begin with. You know, and then I started thinking, well, how come they didn't do something like Guilty, which is a more popular song? But yes, now it makes sense. I was thinking maybe it might have related to the lyrics of the song.
Well, I think that doing a remake of something from 40 years ago is very dangerous
Yeah.
because we're messing with the soundtracks of people's lives.
Hmm.
And even while we were doing the Inside Outside, we were kind of wrestling with, we have to sound like we sound now. You know, we
Yeah.
can't sound like when we were young men. We're old men now. And so if mature people are going to make music, it has to be music that we're going to like and be proud of and feel.
Hmm.
I saw one guy posting, said, Sal doesn't sound like Sal on this. Well, he's right, because he's talking about a song from 40 years ago.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't know if any of us sound like we did 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Uh,
Exactly.
yeah. And so although we kind of wanted to respect the original and the era, you know, as you mentioned
Mhm.
in the introduction, we come from the new romantic era, and we're proud to be innovators of a particular style. You know,
Mhm.
it's really a privilege in the history of music. So we don't want to suddenly sound like a completely different kind of band, but we have to sound like 2021, not like 1981.
Yeah.
And so Inside Outside was a good one because as a song, it definitely sounds like the new romantic era. I
Yeah.
cannot tell you exactly why it does, but it just has that strange kind of slightly Eastern sort of ethereal thing to
Mhm.
it.
Mhm.
And but then the kind of music that we tend to like as people now is a bit heavier, really. You know, we like the heavier drums. We're kind of more guitar focused, really, than
Mhm.
focused. And Gary, he did a lot of great guitar tracks that we really enjoyed, and so that's how we wanted to sound today.
I think that with this new version, you create a new atmosphere, you know, a new vibe, but it still feels familiar and comfortable. And I think, obviously, you said you've made the song contemporary and you've made it sound fresh. So you purposely try to avoid just going, "Hey, let's just do a note for note re-recording."
Absolutely, yeah.
Mhm.
There'd be no point in trying to just simply do a better sounding version of something from long ago, because
Mhm.
your your remake is always going to be inferior to the original, because the original will have had whatever made it special.
Mhm.
So you got to do it differently. And so finding that balance between respecting the original but making something that is at least as good for today. I mean,
Mhm.
personally, I suspect that in time, if people look back at both, they'll probably agree with us that the new one is actually better. But
Yeah.
people have got a lot of sentimental attachment to the original, obviously, especially people who were at the concerts. We used
Yeah.
to often begin our whole show with that particular song. And so I'm sure in their minds, they've got the visions of how it was on the stage and the lighting and all the
Mhm.
excitement. Because
Mhm.
I know when I was a kid and I'd go and see a band, and you know, you always arrive early. I know you guys can relate to this. You'd arrive early, you'd be looking at every single thing on the stage, and
Yeah.
they have the amplifiers with the lights on. It's like, why are they not coming on? Come on,
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
waiting, we're ready. And
Yeah.
there was a particular memory I have of one of the big London shows we did. I think some of the footage is in the video for Inside Outside 2021.
Mhm.
And it was at a place called the Rainbow Theatre. And one of the things was it was a huge old theater, and it was very famous because Frank Zappa once played there, and he got pushed off the stage into the orchestra pit or something and broke his leg.
Wow.
And so we kind of knew about that, and I was a bit worried about getting too close to the
Yeah.
edge. And we had a massive structure built. There was this kind of scaffolding, and so it was kind of like it was a bit like this video actually. There were three boxes down, and there was one box up. So the drums were in the middle. The two guitarists were either side, and I was supposed to be at the top to start off with. There was a
Mhm.
ladder to get up and down, and there was a curtain. So the curtain is down. We all get in our positions, and the intro music starts playing. There's all this smoke and everything. And as I'm trying to get up to the top of the ladder, I used to wear these cloaks and things, and it got caught on the ladder. So I'm kind of hauling at my outfit, trying to make sure I'm up at the top by the time the curtain opens, or this is going to be embarrassing, you know.
Well, aren't you glad that that iPhones weren't around then? Because we would have all seen that by now.
You're right. You're right. Absolutely.
Now, Sal, and you mentioned sounding more mature. I got to say, in the video, you guys look exactly the same.
Isn't that a shock?
You have not aged a bit. Yeah. So
When the four of you decided to do this, it was always just going to be a uh, sort of a reimagining, or was there ever any talk of, hey, let's write something new for the now?
Well, I think that our expectations were very narrow. We just thought,
Mhm.
all these people on Facebook, they love us all every day, and so let's just show a little bit of appreciation for them.
Mhm.
That was it.
Yeah.
We couldn't really get together as such because for a
Yeah.
start, um, the four of us live in three different countries, and so that makes life very difficult. And that's not to mention the whole COVID thing coming along as well. So
Mhm.
this is during the COVID era. So the
Yeah.
idea of us in any shape or form getting together was just not possible.
Yeah.
And so because I already had these tracks that I'd started working on, it
Mhm.
just made sense. All right, well, let's just try this and see what happens. And to be
Mhm.
honest, we didn't expect very much to happen. And we've been kind of taken aback, kind of shocked that there's been such an overwhelmingly enthusiastic reaction that it has made us say, well, maybe we should try and do something new.
You see, that's first off, that's wonderful news because I have this weird habit of feeling music. And I the moment I heard this, it just felt that everybody had just fallen into their place naturally. And does it sound like that to you?
Well, I think you make a good point there because after so many years, we're all better at
Yeah,
what we do.
absolutely.
When we were in our 20s, we were kind of idiots really that didn't know a whole lot of anything, and you just sort of just do what you feel, and you
Mhm.
don't know what's going to happen with it.
Mhm.
But today, Gary is a guitar teacher,
Wow.
and so he's way better than he used to be back then. I'm a choir director, and
Mhm.
so I know how to write parts and arrangements and all this kind of thing. It turned out that BP is as big of a fan of music as he ever was today. I was
Awesome.
surprised that he said he practices every day, really playing along with Stephen Wilson, who's another
Wow.
person who's another person who my friend Nick Beggs plays with.
Yes, exactly.
And so that was kind of interesting. And I think up to the shutdown, Mick was still playing with bands in Ireland. Like I don't know what kind of clubs or bars or
Right,
whatever he
right.
plays at. But he had told us he plays some Classix Nouveaux songs, like his version. We'd love
Mm.
to hear them, but we haven't got to hear them yet.
From the start, far apart, separated and faded hearts. From the start, far apart, for how long have we waited?
I think Nick is probably one of the busiest musicians in the world right now because he's in a couple different bands. He's been involved with Stephen Wilson, and to think that he was the blonde dreadlocked guy from Kajagoogoo. I mean, with me being a fan of all these artists, you already knew how talented he was. I don't even know if the people who listen to him now realizes that he's from Kajagoogoo.
But the interesting thing, you see, when I first met them before they'd released any records,
Mhm.
they were serious musicians. They loved
Oh,
Frank
absolutely.
Zappa and stuff like that. I don't know why we're talking about Zappa today, but they were really kind of like jazz rock musicians. And then
Mhm.
when they did Too Shy, I remember they showed me the cover before it was released, and I was kind of shocked because I said, "You look like the Bay City Rollers on here or something. Is this really what you want to go for?" And so I don't quite know how that happened. I guess that must have been EMI or something that said, they're pretty boys. We're going to market them as teen
Yeah.
heartthrobs. But that was never who they were really at all. I'm sure I don't really remember their other albums too much, but I'm sure if you were to listen to tracks from their albums, you would find there was a lot more very musicianly stuff on there because every single one of them was very, very good. I think I had the keyboard player Stuart play on some of my sessions when I produced other artists. He
Oh,
was he was
wow.
very very good with the. It used to be the Prophet 5 back then, mostly that people were
Mhm.
using,
Mhm.
and Jez, the drummer, he was a very technical kind of guy. They used to all live in a house together, very close to my house, so we hung out a lot, and they had all their equipment set up, and they were very disciplined. They would never
Yeah.
drink when they were working. They all had steady girlfriends and things. They were just so different to what you think of the rock and roll lifestyle. My
Yeah.
people were not at all different. They were much more the rock and roll lifestyle.
Once this new recording of Inside Outside was done, did it take a lot of like passing around to each members and, oh, well, why don't you try something different? Or did you all just really kind of fall in love with what you had created the first time around?
No, I think we had quite a lot of input
Mhm.
from each other, because one of the great things about being older people is a lot of the egos are gone. You know,
Yeah.
I was a terrible egomaniac back in the day,
Mhm.
and you know, I wanted to be recognized and credited and all that kind of thing. And these days, I don't really care, because we don't have to do it. You know,
Yeah.
our lives don't depend on it. Our futures don't depend on it. We've all lived a lot of life outside of Classix Nouveau, and
Mhm.
so therefore, okay, you want to try this? Let's have a listen, see if it's good. You know,
Yeah.
and so we've been able to enjoy respecting each other's ideas and listening to each other's ideas and giving everybody every equal opportunity. If you want to contribute, let's see if it's good.
Your vocals on this are more restrained, yet they seem to connect more emotionally to the song and to the listener. Uh, if you had attempted to sing it like you did back in the old days, would that have been just much less honest for you?
Well, that's a good way of putting it, because um, one of the other songs that we messed with a little bit is It a Dream?
Hmm.
And the one of the musicians in my church choir right now, who's only 21 years old,
Hmm.
he's a big fan. And so of course my style of singing in my old age is much more restrained.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't do all the growling and screaming and stuff. And so so I kind of played him what I was working on. He was a bit disappointed. It's like, you know, satisfaction, you know, because they're kind of looking for that. It's somehow it's not the right song if you don't do that. But you're right. That's the way I felt back then, and that's not the way I feel. We're not
Yeah.
the angry young men anymore.
Yeah.
I was thinking earlier on that you kind of have to understand that we were coming out of punk. BP, as you know, was in a big punk group, X-Ray Specs,
Yeah.
and I was thinking that one of the first times punk kind of became apparent to the general population, there was a movie called Jubilee,
Yeah.
and it had I think Susie and the Banshees were in it, Adam and the Ants, Toya,
Hmm.
and it painted London as a kind of apocalyptic scene. I guess it was kind of like Mad Max before Mad Max was made, and so this idea of you know, destroyed. I guess the Sex Pistols were the best illustration of that. It's like, you know,
Yeah.
everything is awful, destroy.
Hmm.
That was kind of like an attitude of the British youth at that time, maybe American youth too. I don't know. But so the new romantic thing, when it came along, just kind of at the very end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s, we were still a bit sort of you know, up yours kind of attitude.
Yeah.
Boy George used to live in a squat. Do you know what a squat is? I don't know if
Yeah.
they use that word in America.
Yeah.
For those who might not be familiar with the word, it's like a derelict house that they just take over, so
Yeah.
they don't have to pay rent or anything like that.
Yeah.
And it was all a sort of um, almost negative view of society and future. I guess we, the young people, didn't feel that we were listened to, or you know, had any way to influence the world. And so the words of Inside Outside, they say something about, you know, as I look around, nothing much to look forward to.
Hmm.
And I remember in an interview at the time, somebody said to me, is that really your view? You know, are you really that negative? And I said, well, I'm really expressing the view of my generation. You know, it seems like,
Hmm.
and yet, I guess, again, even in world politics and everything, you have to remember we'd come out of the Carter administration and lines for gas sounds familiar, right?
Yeah.
Lines at the gas pumps and war in the Middle East, the American hostages, and there was so many negative things in the
Yes.
world that had been going on at the time. There were strikes. I don't know if it was the same here in America, but in England there was big strikes all the time. Fights between Mrs. Thatcher and the unions, and so there was a lot of conflict really in the world, and so definitely I was expressing that. And one of the fans posted online with this new Inside Outside. He said the words are just as relevant today as they were back then.
Yeah,
Which is very interesting how things go around in circles. But by the time we got to Is It a Dream in 1982, I guess things must have been looking up a bit, because then we were at least being a little more optimistic. It was like Satisfaction, Is It a Dream? No more wars and all that kind of. We weren't exactly saying things were going to be better, but is it possible, things could be better?
Is punk what inspired you to pick up an instrument, Sal? Or were you a musician before, during the prog stuff before punk?
It certainly wasn't what inspired me to pick up an instrument, but it certainly was an influence on, what we were all doing back then, because I think actually, when I was very, very young, I'd have to go back to Motown even, because I remember my mother had discovered Motown, and so one day when I came back from school, she said, "Oh, I've heard on the radio all this music, and it's people like Stevie Wonder and the Four Tops," and so she introduced me to this stuff. And so for a young kid, it was very exciting. At that time, there was no stereo, and so I used to have a radio with a single earphone. And so I'd be going to school on the bus, listening to all this music. And even I think in class, having my little transistor radio in the desk and listening to music during classes. And so then I managed to get myself a guitar, but I didn't have anybody to teach me. And when I was about 14, we got a guitar teacher at school. And by that point, I'd already taught myself to play some kind of Led Zeppelin and Eric Clapton riffs. So the guitar teacher said, he'll never learn, he's kind of going his own way. And because he told us, you only play what I teach you. And it was all classical stuff, but I wasn't really interested in that, And so I'd often say, I bet you I was the only one that ever became a professional musician out of that group. So you don't just stick with what your guitar teacher tells you.
Yeah.
And so the first concert of my life I ever went to with another friend from school was Led Zeppelin at the Royal Albert Hall. And we're coming back to Nick Beggs again. I don't know why we're all Nick Beggs and Frank Zappa in this story. But anyway, much later on, Nick was when I lived in Chicago, was playing in Chicago with John Paul Jones. Oh. And so I went and I met them. And also, funnily enough, I knew the drummer as well for that particular tour. And anyway, I spoke to Mr. Jones, and I told him about the first concert that I'd gone to. And he said, was it the time when there was flowers at the front or not flowers? And I was amazed, because I thought, how could he possibly remember that? I cannot remember all the places I played and whether there was flowers or not flowers or how the hall was decorated. I guess he must just be a very detail-oriented person. Yeah. But getting back to your question in punk, so I had a band just before Classix, and McSweeney was in it, and we kind of started going a little bit in the direction of the punk type of thing. The record company didn't like it, because it was the record company that had discovered the Bay City Rollers, and I don't know if you know who Gary Glitter is. He was.
Oh, of course, yes.
Oh, yeah.
He wasn't really known in America, was he?
One song, Rock and Roll Part 2, I think, is it?
Come on.
Yeah. Not like in the UK, though, where he.
Well, no, actually, in the early Classix days, we did a gig, or maybe a couple of them, opening for Gary Glitter.
Wow.
And it was a bit sad, because by that point he was kind of out of vogue, and he was kind of fat and didn't have money for costumes and things, and the audience were punks, so they were spitting at him and saying "Get off, fatso" and different things like that. But Boy George was a big fan of Gary Glitter, and so Boy George came to one of the shows, and he was sitting in our dressing room, and he was singing Irish songs with Mick Sweeney, because both of them come from Irish families. And he kept trying to persuade us to go and knock on Gary Glitter's dressing room, because I don't know if he wanted an autograph or whatever. But anyway, so make a long story short, our record company didn't like us kind of veering in the punk direction.
Wow.
But after that particular band called the Nouveaux split up, I decided I didn't want to form another band, because I was kind of very disillusioned, having had a big record company deal and having been signed and recording with big producers and everything. I was really very disillusioned, so I'm not going to do that again. So I went to look for bands who were looking for a singer, and so they were all punk bands at that time. So there was one I went to, I can't remember, they were somewhat known, or some of the members were. In fact, I think the guitarist in the band was the original guitarist of the Police. So I somehow knew him already. And so I don't remember what the name of the band was. But anyway, so I auditioned with them. And then the next band I auditioned with was X-Ray Specs.
I know it's true, I've been through, same as you, it's hard to be clear in mind when you find they have to sleep and fall asleep because you're young. There's advice from everyone, although it brings shades of white, both you and me.
Now,
So X-Ray Specs needed a singer at that point?
Yeah.
Not to talk about X-Ray Specs too much, but yeah, wow. So
Yeah.
Polly was gone.
Well, they did the first album, and then she kind of became a Hare Krishna or something.
Right.
And so she didn't want to do it anymore. I guess they just thought we're going to get a new singer, but it's got to be a songwriter as well, because she wrote all the songs for the band. And so there was me and some other guy that they liked. I guess I played them a couple of my songs. Anyway, the way that it went was two of the members of X-Ray Specs liked another guy, and two of them liked me. And so that night, BP said to me, I want to form a band with you. I want to form a band with you in it. And I was like, I don't know if I really want to form a new band. But that's, so I always credit BP as the founder of Classix Nouveaux,
yeah,
because
yeah.
he was the one who persuaded me to form a new band. And Mick had been, as I said, in my previous band, so I called him, and that's how Classix Nouveaux came together.
Well, don't you think it was a better idea, actually, now in hindsight, to form a new band, as opposed to forever be known as, oh, that's that Sal Solo guy who tried to take over for Polly in X-Ray Specs? You know,
100%. Everybody would have hated me if I'd have tried to, step in the shoes of somebody so famous, because
yeah,
there was really only two female leads of punk bands that were known at the time, and that was Susie and Polly.
yeah.
And she used to have the fronts of newspapers and magazines and everything, because she was so different. And so you're right, BP says that nobody could have taken her place.
Yeah, I think that didn't Malcolm replace Annabella with Boy George temporarily, and that's what sort of brought Bow Wow Wow to an end.
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
I mean, it's probably the same for Classix, really. At some point, I saw people online. The fans always believed for many years that I hated Classix or something. There's no way I would ever be associated with them again. So there was one sort of set of postings at one point that was saying, well, could the guys get somebody else? And so there were some suggestions, and so I looked up a couple of bands where they were suggesting the singers could take my place. And I came across, I don't think it's on YouTube anymore, unfortunately. I'd love to be able to put it out there, but I came across a band in New York in some club, and they were playing Guilty. And there was some guy with long hair, obviously, as the singer. And I was thinking, wow, this guy's trying to be me. How strange.
I know you've made up your mind, but don't say
you know, apart from the new recording, did the band have input on putting this out?
Well,
The Cherry
kind
Red?
of yes, kind of yes and no. The the strange thing with recordings and masters from so long ago
Hmm.
is I believe that at a certain point, the rights are supposed to revert back to the artists.
Yeah.
But the thing is, we were not together as a band, and we didn't have any plan to do anything with them. And so whenever they would companies would contact me and talk about this stuff, I just didn't really have any idea what to do with it.
Hmm.
Because with old master tapes back in that those days, everything was recorded on 2-inch tape,
Hmm.
right? Ronnie, I'm sure, is very familiar with this.
Yep. Yep.
And so these big 2-inch tapes, you had to have special machines to play them on. Obviously, they cost an arm and a leg, which is why only studios had them.
Yeah.
And over time, I believe the oxide on the tapes deteriorates. So when they want to re-release something, they have to bake them in some kind of oven so that all the
Yeah.
particles attach again.
Hmm.
So when they started doing Classix reissues on CD, they started baking the tapes. And so there was questions about what there was that was available or what was actually listenable and different things
Hmm.
like that. And add to that the fact that I've told you honestly, I didn't really take a whole lot of interest in Classix for 30 years anyway.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I didn't even remember a lot of the songs, even to this day. Sometimes when the fans are posting a B-side or something, it's like, well, the title sounds familiar, but I don't really know how it goes. And so by the time of this new version, they basically wanted to put out everything that there is.
Yeah.
And so rather than go over and say, well, I don't like this one, or I don't think this one is good enough, I don't
Hmm.
really think that I'm the person to judge that,
Hmm.
because it's the fans. You know, if the fans want it, all right, we'll let them have it. You know,
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
recorded it, we put it out there. So that's it. It's they own it now, not us. So that's basically what happened. They asked me to do some notes for the album.
Yes.
So in that
Hmm.
sense, I participated and approved of it, but that's all really.
In terms of, like, back in the day when you were releasing the albums, was it strange or kind of annoying to, put thought into covers and packaging, and then in the US get a different album cover and slightly altered track listing? Is that something that was precious to you, that hey, don't mess with this, or were you just whatever?
I think we would always prefer the original.
Hmm.
You're quite right. We did put a lot of time and thought into what things look like. I mean,
Hmm.
obviously, in that particular era of music, the whole image of the band, the clothes and the photographs and everything, we wouldn't do the same thing again today. But at the
Hmm.
time,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, it was very important to us,
Hmm.
the staging and everything, really. And so sometimes when we'd go to other countries, I mean, I remember we went to India, and I don't know if it's changed since then, but at the time in India, they used to paint billboards by hand. And so
Oh.
Wow.
we were in a car going somewhere to a gig, and BP suddenly says out the back, "Hey, look, I think that's supposed to be us." So there's a big painting somewhere in Bombay, and the size of everybody's heads is different and things, because they'd never seen us. They'd never seen us in real life. And so, it's very interesting what you find in different countries.
When you think about songs, or when you hear an old recording, what kind of memories comes back to you? Is it the memory of writing the song? Is it the memory of recording it? The memory of the audience reaction? Or is it kind of all of that coming together at once?
I think it depends on the song. There's
Hmm.
really different memories for each song.
Hmm.
See, just off the top of my head, as you asked that, um, you mentioned Guilty. Well, I don't know if you've ever seen anything from a live concert when we were doing that, but I used to have this mirror guitar, and there'd be two spotlights
Yes. Yes.
shooting out to the audience. So that's my main memory of Guilty. It's like, wow, that was fun. You know, that was a cool thing to do in the concerts. The later songs, particularly from our third album, I do have a memory of with Mick Sweeney being in his very untidy bedroom at his parents' house in London, and us just trying to say, you know, we got to really come up with some good melodies here. And he was very good with chords at that time. I mentioned to you, I'm a choir director now. I know everything about harmonies that I didn't back then. And so I kind of remember writing some of those songs, like with him, like Never Never Comes is one of our most popular songs.
Yes.
Especially with the Polish. And so we really had a big focus then on the melodic side of things.
Daylight turning into deep night. Whoa, inside forever, you know. Never, never comes. Never, never comes. Never, never
I remember in the studio recording those songs, we were very focused by that point of trying to raise the quality of the sound.
Yeah.
So we had Alex Sadkin was our producer, and he was known for the Thompson Twins was one of the things he did at the time. And we loved that really crisp, I'd call it a very plastic sound, really, very electronic sound. You know, everything was pristine synth sounds and beats, you know, all computer type beats when computers were just starting to come in. And so that would be my memory of that. With the first album, I've got a strange memory that came back to me recently. I don't know, I think we were working on the final song, the Protector of Night, it was called. And in the other studio in that building, there was a British soul group. They probably were not known here. They were called Imagination. And they had a hit song. It was called something like Body Talks or something like that. And we were just brainwashed. Like every time we'd move, body talk, da, 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 da. It was like for hours and hours and hours. I'm trying to think. The producers, they were the guys. You got an album from Spandau Ballet back there, and they were the guys who went on to produce some of the Spandau Ballet soul stuff, like True and Gold.
I think it's Jolly and Swain.
Yes, those were the guys. So they were producing Imagination before that. Although Imagination for Ronnie, I don't know if you're familiar with that sound, but it had a very interesting synth bass to it that sounded like a fretless bass. It was actually a synthesizer, but they programmed it with all these kind of bends and things. So you should actually, if you're not familiar with it, go and check it out after the interview, Body Talk with Imagination. And here it's really a cool bass line, because we were always listening out for new sounds. You know, we were very aware that this was a time when there were plenty of innovations and new things were being invented all the time. And we wanted to be in the vanguard of something new. And so when we'd hear something, it was like, okay. And so I mentioned Never Never Comes, and that has on it a Chapman stick, which now is Nick's instrument, of course. But Nick didn't play it.
Oh, wow.
Nick didn't play it on that. It was another guy who actually, he was sort of like the receptionist at the studio at the time, but he'd been in a band with me before, so I knew he played Chapman stick. And so he came in and played that. And I knew it from Chocolate Monkey. That was it. And it was like, I heard that sound. It's like, yeah, we've got to do that. That's a great new sound for bass. And so those are some of the memories going back.
In my opinion, each album revealed a band that was constantly evolving and maybe feeling more comfortable as a unit, more comfortable in the studio, and also becoming better songwriters, as you had mentioned. Secret is my favorite Classix Nouveau record. Even on the early ones, there's that unique chemistry. Do you have maybe a favorite album or song?
Yeah, I think I would kind of agree with you that probably Secret is my favorite album.
Mhm.
And it would be because it was a fantastic producer, Alex Sadkin. See,
Mhm.
we talked earlier. He obviously he went on to record Duran Duran and their biggest
Yeah.
hits, Foreigner, I Want to Know What Love Is, and
Mhm.
then he tragically died in a car crash when he was still in his 30s.
Yeah.
But he was incredible because he used to be the house engineer of Island Records,
Mhm.
and he knew everything about frequencies and stuff. He'd hear something and he'd say, "Oh, there's a bit of kind of 500 hertz missing there," and we had no idea what that was. And the other thing that we did was we we recorded. We were talking earlier about these 2-inch tapes that
Yeah.
bands used to do 24 track on. So he
Yeah.
got the idea, if we got two 2-inch machines and we did just 16 tracks on it, so we got 32 tracks, each track would be wider, so it would be better quality.
Mhm.
And so that was amazing. You had to have some kind of a special thing to sync together two machines, and they were always, the tape was always coming off the end
Yeah.
as they were speeding. It was very kind of frustrating and time consuming. But another thing that he did towards the end of the album, when it was mixing time, he said, when we come in tomorrow, I want you to bring all your favorite records and we're going to listen to them. And I remember being a bit outraged. It was like, we don't want to copy anybody else. We've got our own
Yeah.
sound. But I learned a great lesson from him, because what would happen, like at the time, there was Trevor Horn producing ABC and things
Yeah.
like that.
Mhm.
And so we'd put on a current big hit record and then he'd play our one. And it's like, does that sound as good as that? Maybe we need to, change this, the drums or something like
Mhm.
that. And so ever since that day, I've always done that with my productions. It's like, okay, I don't want to copy anybody else, but I've got to be sure it sounds as good as anybody
Yeah.
else.
Yeah. Yeah. What
And so definitely of its time, Secret is the highest quality sounding record you can have.
yeah.
But you're right, in the songwriting too. I already mentioned we paid a lot more attention to the melodies, and also in the lyrics there was more kind of poetry. For a couple of songs, I remember I went to Mexico, and some fan presented me with some poetry that he'd written, and I thought, this is really fascinating, because you don't really know what it's about, but it just sounds great. It's very kind of
Yeah.
ethereal. And so I think I used some of his poetry in a couple of songs, so like on Never Never Comes, this imagery we never come to see and all that. I don't know what the song's about. I don't know what he does, but it sounds good. So I think probably that would be my favorite, although my real favorite is Inside Outside 2021.
Yeah.
And looking back, I cannot believe that EMI allowed us to just be in a studio on our own and pay the bills. If I was
Yeah.
the record company, I'd say, all right, I've signed up this completely new unknown band of
Mhm.
20 somethings that have never done anything. And so I'm going to make sure I put somebody in there who knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
And in a way, I'm very envious of bands. We mentioned Duran, Spandau Ballet. They were put in right away with top producers, and so they had the best sound. It took us a long time to really
Right.
figure out our sound, because we
Mhm.
knew what we were like live.
Mhm.
Anybody that had seen the band live would tell you it was very exciting, very dynamic, very exciting at the time. But we had not really spent enough time in the studio because it was so expensive back then, studio time.
Yeah. Mhm.
And so I really do regret that they didn't force us to take a good producer. It took us 3 albums before we got to the point of saying, hey, it'd be better if we had somebody who knew what they were doing.
Hey, Sal, as far as playing live, you had mentioned that you used to wear cloaks and elaborate outfits. Who made those clothes? Did you make them yourself? Did you have a designer?
Well, yeah, sometimes budding designers would come up to me, because I guess having a front man as extrovert as I was at the time is like a dream for designers, because anything you can think, you could probably do it. There
Yeah.
was a time around the first album, I think, where some woman from Texas contacted me in London, and she said, I've designed clothes for Mick Jagger and Alice Cooper, and now I want to design clothes for you. And so I said, all right. So we were in the studio doing our second album, and this big package arrives from America, and I think it was written on there, for your eyes only. And so I was a bit suspicious of what this was going to be. And the other guys in the band said, come on, open it. And I was like, I don't know if I really want to open this. So when I opened it, it was a big album of this kind of 40-something-year-old woman in negligees and underwear and you name it. And I really didn't want to touch it. But anyway, that was one of the most extraordinary. I don't know why. I'm just the kind of artist that always tended to attract these very strange followers. I don't know if you know movies like Play Misty for Me or Fatal Attraction.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah.
I mean, even in relatively recent years, there were women from France who would show up in every country I was playing and things like that. And so that's why, if you follow the Facebook groups, oftentimes you'll have BP interacting with the fans, sometimes Mick, but I never do, because I just tend to attract these very strange people. But I also did have, sometimes I'd have an idea for a costume myself, and so one of my friend's wives had been a fashion designer, so I would explain to her what was in my head, and then she would make it. And so when I ended up with like Spider-Man arms and things like that, that was some weird idea in my head.
Superstitious minds say once more then twice shy. Maybe you'll not die. One more time I will try to
But right at the beginning, I remember Boy George told me that some theatrical place was shutting down, and they were selling off all their stuff. And he said, "You got better get down there quick." And so I ended up with Yul Brynner pants and Dracula cloak from there.
How did
That's
this stuff hold up on the road, Sal? Like, I mean, packing a cloak. What does that travel in?
Well, you bring back another memory there, because I had these huge bags, and the first time we came into it in America, I think we went Boston to Toronto, and in Toronto, towards the end of the set, I must have made some weird leap and ended up on my ankle. So the next day in the hotel, when I got up and I tried to step out of bed, my ankle was all swollen. I couldn't walk on it. And so I called our tour manager, and I guess they got ice and a doctor and things. And then I had a walking stick for a while. And so the other members of my band had to pull all of my luggage. And so I remember like kind of looking at that and thinking, oh, poor guys. Well, the first time we played in New York, I actually had to sit on a stool. And so that was very strange, me doing a Tony Bennett type of act. But I think we did 2 or 3 nights, and so I think maybe by the third night I'd found a way. I used to wear these kind of boxing boots at the time, and so I think I found a way of tying them up so tight that I couldn't really feel my ankles, so I was able to move in some robotic fashion at least.
You had this unique voice where it's this low growl, and then this you call it a scream, I call it falsetto. But I mean, it's a very because they're so different from each other, and not many people have that kind of range. Did you
I
discover it
guess.
by accident?
Um, well, I had some influences, you know,
Mhm.
and so I think I thought I was singing like Janis Joplin or something like that. It didn't sound anything like it. But then John Lennon and Paul McCartney thought they were singing like Smokey Robinson, I guess.
Yeah, yeah,
And
exactly.
you know, that's the way influences work. But when I was very young, I think the very first record I bought. Now, you guys might not be old enough to know this, but it started, I am the god of hellfire, and
Oh,
I
Oh
bring
yeah,
you.
yeah,
And
yeah. Was
so
it Crazy World of Arthur
yeah,
Brown?
crazy world of Arthur Brown. So he
Yeah.
did this strange kind of screaming, and he also had fire blazing out of his head. And so as a child, I thought this is, and also actually he had the Alice Cooper makeup before Alice Cooper did.
Mhm.
And so I think as a child, I thought this was the most exciting thing that I'd ever seen. And so that's probably what set me off with the idea of the screaming, really.
What about the visual? Did you shave your head?
The band that I had before Classix that I
Mhm.
mentioned called the News, our manager, I'd mentioned we were signed to a major label, and our manager decided to take us to what these days is called a stylist, but back then it was just a hairdresser.
Mhm.
And so the hairdresser, she didn't realize that you're supposed to come up with a general image for the band, you know. And
Uh-huh.
the other thing was our manager at the time, he had some connection to Queen. And so he thought, and Queen, I guess they'd had Bohemian Rhapsody at that time.
Mhm.
And so they were the, I guess they were the like the biggest newish thing. They were
Yeah.
at their original peak. So that was his standard for everything. It was like, well, what Queen does, you should be doing something like that. And so this hairdresser, she didn't realize, and I suppose you could argue that Queen didn't really have one image anyway, because you had um, Freddie looking one way and
Yeah.
Brian looking a totally other way.
Mhm.
So each one of us would sit down in the hairdresser's chair, and she would say, oh, I think bleaching would be good for you. Or one of them sits down, oh, I'll give you a perm. I guess she wanted to make him into Brian May. So I sat down and she said, Kojak. And I said, what? And Kojak, all off. She said, we'll take all your hair off. And I'm looking at her completely freaked out. She said, I cannot do it. You'll have to go home and do it for yourself with a razor. So I went home, but she warned me. She said, the difference between having no hair and having any hair is very drastic. So I go home, and I was 21 years old, I think. And so I shaved my head, and I'm thinking, what have I done? I've become a Martian. And so I'm sitting down, and my friend comes around, knocks at the door, and I'm thinking they're going to say, what have you done to yourself? So my friend walks in. He said, oh, that really suits you. And so that was it. From that day, that was what suited me. Because
Oh.
I always used to say, if you cannot be pretty, at least be noticed. And so I was never going to be a pretty boy. And you know, others in the band, Gary and Mick, were quite nice looking, but I was sorry, BP, I wasn't. You know. Noticed. I guess the other thing I mentioned, Arthur Brown and Alice Cooper. The best live show I ever saw in my lifetime was Alice Cooper doing "Welcome to My Nightmare." I was never that much into his music. I did like Schools Out, but I didn't like the stuff that came later. But it was such a fantastic live show, and so I think the idea of the theatricality going over the top always somehow appealed to me. I don't really know why, but it just did. And in some ways, looking back, if I had not done that, maybe Classix would have been more popular, because all the people who hated the band, especially the critics, they either hated the theatricality coming from me or the screaming and the histrionics. And so
Mhm.
if I'd have been a bit more sober and just sang nicely and stood more still, we probably would have been more successful.
How can viewers stay updated on all things Classix, Nouveau, and Sal Solo?
Well, there's an official YouTube channel now. There's not a
Mhm.
lot on there, but there are some things on there that we created because of the Inside Outside 2021. And so there's a couple of playlists on there. So some of them have all the old stuff. There's one that's all the cover versions, which is quite fun, you know, all
Mhm.
the drum remakes and bass remakes. And so that's interesting for us too. One of the fans actually posted something about they have their own remakes or remixes, and would we like to hear them? So the answer is yes. We would love to hear
Yeah.
somebody else, you know, what they do with our music. There's
Mhm.
even a version on there that's got a rapper. It's like Guilty mixed with a rapper. I don't know who the rapper is, but it's an interesting take. And then on Facebook, there seems to be two Classix groups. I don't exactly know who runs them, but one of them is called something like Get Classix Nouveau Back on Stage, and I think the other one is just called Classix Nouveau. And so if you're on Facebook, I'm sure you can find them.
Well, that's it for this episode of Beach Blanket Fort Bingo. Ronnie and I would like to thank our special guest, the esteemed Sal Solo from Classix Nouveau, for stopping by and chatting about the brand new Inside Outside 2021 re-recording and the band's history. We really appreciate it, Sal, and we recommend you all go check out Classix Nouveau. You can download the new single, you can stream it, do whatever you want, but whatever you do, pay attention, because it's definitely worth your while. We thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next time on Beach Blanket Fort Bingo. Goodbye, everybody.
I didn't wave because there's this green screen thing going on, so my hand
Oh.
looked weird.
Oh, yeah,
Smart,
yeah. Wow.
smart
weird.
man.
It's not the end. It's not the end.